Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode. I'm Mike Monticello.
I'm Alex Nizick.
And I'm Ryan Pizolkowski.
So today we're going to talk about our first impressions of the all-new 2022 Ford Maverick. Now, this is a small pickup that's car-based in the vein of a Honda Ridgeline, a Hyundai Santa Cruz. In fact, it actually slots size-wise right in between those two. And it's based on the Bronco Sport and the Escape small SUVs. And here's an interesting tidbit for you. The Maverick is the first ever pickup truck in the U.S. to come standard with a hybrid powertrain. So that's kind of interesting. And base prices range from $19,995 for the base XL front-wheel drive hybrid to $25,860 for the Lariat. But just keep in mind, those prices do not include the absolutely ridiculous $1,495 destination charge that Ford makes all customers pay. We bought a mid-grade XLT with the optional 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder. Keep in mind, we are going to buy a hybrid, but we couldn't get one yet, right? Is that the problem? We haven't been able to get our hands on one?
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many are really out there at this point. I know they stopped taking orders, and there was a little bit of a hiccup with the hybrid version. So
okay, but so it's still in our plans to buy one. So we got this 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder for now. It's getting break-in miles. That's why these are our first impressions. And this truck that we bought has a price of $29,965. So, all new truck. Ryan, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about the driving dynamics, the powertrain, the ride and handling. What do you think of this truck as a vehicle to drive, whether as a pickup or just as an everyday vehicle?
So yeah, it's finally here. I mean, it seemed like it took forever to get our hands on this elusive vehicle. And my first impressions were honestly, it's easy to drive. You just jump in it and go. It's simple. It's got that dial shifter. You just pop it into drive and off you go. It's small. It is. It feels like a car when you drive it. You don't realize that there's even that extra seat and a bed behind you. It's fairly narrow. So it's pretty nimble. I think it's confident handling. The steering isn't anything special, but it's it's fairly natural. It turns where you want it to go. The powertrain I thought was a little bit underpowered, to be honest with you. At times, granted, I drove it around by myself. I never had a full load of people or stuff in the bed. So that leads me to wonder what that's like. But it has enough power. I thought the transmission actually did okay. It hung on to some gears at times because it needed that power. It was kind of wringing those gears out a little bit, and a few hiccups downshifting. But other than that, I thought it was pretty well sorted. I mean, it's not perfectly refined. I wouldn't say that, but it's a good little runaround car. And now it's this versatile truck with a bed that I think is considerably better than the Santa Cruz. It's metal for one. It's got some tie downs in it, and it's
I agree with you on the fact that it is easy to just get in and drive. And I thought that this turbo 4-cylinder is well matched to the size and weight of the Maverick. Alex, I feel like you weren't quite as enthused maybe with the powertrain, maybe as Ryan. Not that Ryan was super enthused, but didn't you feel there? I saw some logbook comments where you maybe weren't quite as thrilled with it.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't quite. I know on paper it says it's got 250 horsepower, but it just didn't quite feel that way to me.
It doesn't feel like that.
And maybe it's the way you have to drive it to access that power. And I think the torque comes on quite a bit higher in the rev range, which for a pickup truck, you might expect it to be a little bit lower, a little torqueier down low, but you really have to rev that turbo engine out to get the power. But that being said, it's I guess splitting hairs at that point. It's pretty decent. I think it is well matched to the power or to the transmission. It works well. And in terms of driving, yeah, I think Ryan, you nailed it with it's pretty competent to drive. It is not as bad as you might think when you see a $20,000 starting price. You're like, oh man, how does it's not really going to drive all that great. But considering that, I was impressed. And Mike, like you said, it's based on the Escape, which is Ford's C2 platform. And the Escape is actually pretty nice to drive. It's kind of sporty. And then you get to the Bronco Sport, which is also based on that. And it's kind of a little less sporty. And then I'd say then the Maverick even slots in below that, where it's even further a little less sporty than that. So it just kind of gets watered down as you get to these different derivatives.
So in terms of driving dynamics, it goes Escape, Bronco Sport, Maverick, which is not
In
super
my
surprising.
opinion.
Which is not super surprising. Here's one of the things I thought. I thought the transmission worked pretty well in terms of especially nice smooth upshifts. Really enjoyed that. What I found was that because the transmission, like so many transmissions these days, look, they're trying to get good fuel economy, right? It tries to get into as tall of a gear, as high of a gear as quickly as it can. So you end up in some of these 1,300 to 1,500 RPM sort of lugging zones, right? Where, it's really pulling lower revs than the engine is comfortable. So you've got some vibrations going on. And that would happen maybe when I'm on, say, a secondary road, going like 40 to 50 miles an hour, somewhere in that range. I found that a little annoying, but not a deal breaker, because it either A, will just figure that out reasonably soon and, downshift, or if you just kind of touch the throttle a little bit harder, then it takes care of it for you. So I found that kind of annoying. And the engine just, go ahead.
Sorry, no, that's new official lingo, lugging zone.
Yeah, lugging zone. Lugging zone.
That's a new term. I like
which
that.
we experienced with the other two vehicles we were talking about, the
Absolutely.
Bronco and the
Yeah,
Escape.
yeah.
Even though they're different engines, it's the way they're tuning these to, like you said,
it's a real
shift
thing.
early.
Right. And I also thought there's just nothing inspiring about the sound of the engine. Not that it has to be like this great sounding sporty engine, but it sounds kind of wheezy and industrial. Did you guys kind of think that too? Or
Yeah,
A little bit like a turbocharged blender under the hood.
yeah.
No, I just kind of felt like it matched its like it didn't have a ton of power, and it's not like some well refined vehicle. It just kind of it fits it in a way,
But I also thought that I was expecting a worse ride. Not that I just was expecting, because it sort of is a little. We'll get into the interior, which is a little bit crude, maybe. I was expecting the truck to not maybe ride quite as well as it did. Not that it doesn't ride like a Ridgeline, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
no
it still rides better than a lot of pickups. And, it just doesn't really beat you up. It's definitely firm.
Yeah.
And there are situations where it gets kind of bouncy, but I thought it wasn't, let's just say I was expecting worse. Is that fair, or?
Considering the price, I think, again, going back to that, you kind of expect like this economy car ride. And this thing, if you look at the dimensions, it has a really long wheelbase for the overall dimensions and size and width and weight of the car. So I think that kind of, even though the dampers and springs are stiff, it kind of just smooths out the ride a little bit, which helps.
So we're talking about kind of, a pretty basic truck, pretty basic vehicle. Alex, let's move inside to the interior. How would you rate what you've seen so far on this Maverick in terms of the interior quality and seat comfort and all, and space and all that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the basicness definitely carries from the outside back into the inside. So that's still true. But I was surprised at, considering the price again, you expect to just get into this sea of black plastic with no design or any, attention to detail or anything like that. And that's not really the case, I found. Yes, the materials fit the price tag, but there's some attention paid to how things look and the design of things. There's some details going on. Like there's little Ford screws placed about that you can look at. And they use this kind of interesting white and gray material on the dash for the trim that looks kind of neat. So point is that they didn't just phone in, a crappy looking interior, for lack of a better term. But in terms of usability, it's super functional. To Ryan's point about just getting in and driving, everything is super simple. The controls, you've got a button for basically everything. It feels like you're hopping into a vehicle that's, older school in that regard, right? The infotainment's super simple. You got buttons, knobs, whatever. It's easy to figure out. Everything is where you expect. So I think that's a great virtue.
You know what doesn't have a button? The starter. And it doesn't have push button start. So Ford geniusly designed this really cool key fob holder in the steering column. So you take the key, you put it into the steering column, and you turn it. And now the key fob is held in place. You don't have to put it in the cup holder or in your pocket. I don't know how they came up with this genius idea, but I'm all for it.
I like it. I like it.
It kind of drove me nuts because it brought me back to like when I drive my father's has an old 2500 Silverado, and he has like 50 keys hanging off of his key chain. They dangle on my leg and they clatter against the dash, and it drives me nuts. And I found that with this thing, I had to actually take off our gate fob and the identification tag that's on it because it was driving me nuts, dangling around like that. It's something that I don't know, you take for granted when you drive all these new cars all the time. But the interior, I was a bit let down. I mean, this is going to sound rude, but like the door panels, they used a material that literally is from a porta potty. It's like that. It's
That's
like
what
that,
it looks like.
I know.
It's like a white.
I don't know if I could say that or not.
I'm sorry to the people who designed it, and that was their idea. But I understand the idea, and I give them a lot of credit because they did try to mix up and make different contrasting colors, and for that kind of money, I mean, listen, if it starts at $20,000, that's unheard of nowadays, right? So that's great. But the some of the plastic like that, the door panels, I'm telling you, I thought it looks like that like medical like plastic porta potty material.
Yeah,
I was like, and then when the door handles got kind of like a neat, like, it's easy to grab, but when you grab it, if you can feel the door panel move a bit. Like it's like, am I going to rip this off if I was like in a rush or something? And maybe I'm just an aggressive door shutter. But
I've heard that about you. They've been talking about.
I want to make sure that door is shut. Yeah.
What's with the orange panels here and there? Did we get some special option trim that like the orange option or something?
I don't know. They really tried to contrast there. Yeah,
it's weird looking. It just doesn't. It doesn't fit, and it's like, where did this orange come from all of a sudden?
Right.
Anyway.
I kind of reserve some judgment on that because in other models or other trims, it could be different colors and whatnot, and maybe it's not as bright as ours or vibrant. But
the front seat just doesn't work for me though. Like, and I don't like the Bronco Sports seat. I don't like the Escape seat. Right. Because the bottom cushion has very little like side lateral support in terms of bolsters, and you can't adjust. Again, we have to give it some leeway here. It is a pretty basic, pretty inexpensive truck as far as pickups go, but you can't adjust the bottom cushion up and down for tilt. So when you have a seat that doesn't have much support for the sides of your legs, it's nice to be able to tilt it up and down, and you can't do that with this one. So that bothered me a little bit. I spent actually a fair amount of time in this truck because I drove it to Vermont for a ski weekend with my girlfriend. And that's when I realized that it was just a pretty easy truck to deal with, a pretty easy vehicle to deal with as far as just, like you said, both you getting in and just driving. But you realize, going from, say, an F-150, which we have, full-size trucks quite often at Consumer Ports, just the space, even in the rear seat area, just to throw stuff. We're bringing food, we're bringing, clothes and all that stuff. It's pretty small. And then the bed being so small, I could barely fit my skis, diagonally across the bed. I mean, I had to kind of like really shove it in there to get it in there. And so for me, that, like easy to deal with, but again, it just doesn't work for me too well. But, you do realize when you get a small truck like this, you are sacrificing not only the bed, but you're sacrificing that rear seat area as well.
Yeah. If you're coming from an SUV, just like you experienced with that ski trip, Monty, if you have like soft bags, luggage and stuff that would normally go in the trunk of an SUV, now that kind of has to go in the back seat of this truck because, in winter, if it's raining or whatever, you can't really just throw that in the bed and it gets all wet or whatever. So before you could have luggage and still have space for rear passengers. So if you had 4 people with you, that might have been much more of a challenge because you couldn't fit everybody's stuff in the cab along with, still allowing to sit in the seats. So I think it's just something, it sounds obvious, but got to keep it in mind if you're coming from a small SUV.
Yeah. Alex, you did kind of a fun thing recently where you did a story for consumerreports.org that was 6 things we love about the new Ford Maverick. And talk us through some of those things that you thought were kind of interesting about this truck.
Yeah. I mean, I think what comes to everybody's mind, or if you're a truck buyer or somebody familiar with trucks, is you want to know how much a small truck like this can tow. Base Mavericks, the hybrid, and then even if you get the turbo, but front wheel drive, they can do 2,000 pounds of towing. But more impressive is you can get a tow package that increases it to 4,000, which is, quite a bit more than the about 1,500, 2,000 average that you see with a small SUV. And then every Maverick is rated for 1,500 pounds of payload, which is, again, smaller than a full-size truck, of course, but pretty decent. There's QR codes that are placed, I think, one inside and then one on the bed. If you scan them with your phone, it brings you to a Ford website. It shows you how you can make some things like a bike rack for the bed. And then you can also 3D print various things for the inside of this truck. And then there's tons of storage in this truck. There's tons of little storage pockets and cubbies to just throw stuff. And then you can partition the bed using, there's these little slots that basically run the sides of the bed, and you can cut 2x4s or whatever and make these different partitions to hold stuff, however, whatever meets your needs. So little thoughtful details like that don't necessarily increase the cost of the truck, but just give it more flexibility and versatility.
Does the Maverick have under bed storage like the Santa Cruz and the Ridgeline?
No, that's a great point. It does not.
Do you guys see that as a real problem or not so much? I mean, the Ridgelines is quite large. I mean, that is totally a usable, like, under-bed trunk. The Santa Cruz is a little smaller, but then this one doesn't have one at all.
Yeah, I don't know if that it would affect me, but okay. I never found myself using those in the other ones. But yeah, that's perfectly viable. I mean, that's a lot of room that you could use, and especially in the case where Alex is talking about, if it's raining, you're not putting your soft bags in the bed of the truck to go up north or wherever you're doing. Mm-hmm. So, all
right, we're going to have a lot more on the Maverick coming soon because it's going to go through our full road test program. Don't forget, there's a full preview story on the Maverick that we've written on consumerreports.org. We have Alex's really cool 6 things you need to know about this truck up on consumerreports.org. So check both of those out. And now let's move on to an audience question for the show. And folks, don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. And as luck would have it, today we have a video question. This one comes from Zaid in Maryland. Let's see what he has to say.
My wife and I, both of us, own a vehicle. My wife drives a 2018 Mazda 3 hatchback, and I personally drive a 2009 Infiniti G37 S Coupe. So we are thinking about, should we downsize by trading in both of our cars into the electric vehicle, or trade in only one car and keep the Mazda 3 hatchback, for example? Our budget is $45,000, and we are very interested in the Hyundai Ioniq 5. So should we go ahead and trade in one of the cars and get the Hyundai Ioniq 5 for the $45,000 with the mid-level, or with that price buy a used Tesla Model 3 or Model S? Thank you.
Well, I mean, Zaid, there's nothing more of interest right now, it seems, than electric vehicles. So this is a fantastic question that I think we're going to see a lot of more people have going forwards. Is what do they do with their current cars, and what should they do about getting an electric vehicle and win? So Ryan, let's start with you. He brings up some interesting questions here. What's your kind of solution for Zaid?
Yeah, so I would not get rid of both gasoline engines for one EV, or even two EVs. I think you need to have at least because of the ranges on these cars nowadays, no matter what you get, you need to have one vehicle that you don't have to worry about that with, a gasoline car.
Like for taking trips and stuff, right?
Yeah,
Ryan,
for taking trips. For daily commuting, absolutely. The EVs can work out great. But to me, I would, keeping the Mazda 3, which is an awesome car, great car, good on fuel and fun to drive and all. And then getting something like that Ioniq 5. I mean, we have one, still early yet, but easy to drive. It rides pretty nice. Maybe get rid of the G37, which is a soft spot in my heart. I would have a hard time getting rid of that too. I think
and the Mazda 3 is newer. So
yeah,
keep the newer car. I like where you're going with this. Keep the newer car that they both say they love.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We, like you said, Ryan, we have an Ioniq 5 in our test fleet right now. Again, it's another car that's going through our test program. Our mid-trim SEL all-wheel drive, just a shade over $51,000. So that's pretty close to the price range that Zaid was talking about. Alex, do you have a different take or a little more information, maybe another angle?
Same take, same angle. I definitely think keeping the Mazda is the right move. It's more efficient, more practical if you both like it. And I'll add that I did look up some used Tesla prices, and it really seems like it's tough to find something right now in that price range. And what I was finding was, pretty well used Model 3's standard range. So those are, I believe, rear wheel drive. And so you're really pushing your budget to get like the lowest level Tesla you can manage to even find one at that point. So I agree with what Ryan said. The Ioniq 5 so far is great. And what I'll add to that is you can still take advantage of the $7,500 tax credit if you go with a new Ioniq 5, whereas even if you were to get a new Tesla, you're not getting that, and
right.
especially if you buy one used. So you could kind of stretch your budget a little bit if you can make that work.
That's a great point. Yeah. Okay. So I think take all those thoughts into account, Zaid, and maybe it sounds like maybe we're looking at keeping the Mazda 3 and going with an Ioniq 5.
Let us know how you like the Hyundai.
Absolutely, because we like it pretty well so far. But again, more to come on that. That's going to do it for this episode. You can click on the links in the show notes to learn more about the cars and the topics that we talked about. Don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips at talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week.